On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 179. The Israeli delegation to hostage negotiations has left Cairo. More pessimism was reported today compared to yesterday's mild optimism. The U.S. National Security Advisor reportedly told the Israeli delegation that the plans to invade Rafah are not impressive and not applicable. 7 aid workers of the World Central Kitchen killed in an IDF airstrike targeting their convoy in Deir el-Balah. The organization has suspended its activities throughout the Gaza Strip. UN Security Council due to convene a special session on the assassination carried out in Damascus against the commanders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in the Iranian consulate. Israel's defense minister says that Israeli direct rule in the Gaza Strip is not realistic and would be against the security interests of the country. Hello everyone, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here I bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It's currently the evening of April 2nd, 2024 in the United States, the morning of April 3rd, 2024 in the Middle East. Before I get started, I will say that I am going to be traveling for the next couple of days, so there will not be regular summaries. I will be back on Sunday. If any major events occur, I will put out special videos about them in the coming days. Starting with the hostage situation, the Israeli delegation has left Cairo after formulating Israel's answer in the negotiations and delivering it to negotiators who are then going to transmit it to Hamas and await Hamas's answer. Related to this, the Saudi Al Arabiya news network reported today about the hostage negotiations, stating that Israel has shown more flexibility on some matters, including opening another corridor for safe passage of Gazans to return to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in several moderated stages, and that Israel has also possibly eased some of the restrictions it wanted to impose on Gazan civilians returning. The report adds, however, that the Israeli delegation also demanded in return that negotiators be informed on, quote, the condition of hostages in the Gaza Strip. Likely this refers to the list that Israel has been demanding about which hostages are alive and which are dead, so that Israel knows how many hostages it is negotiating for, because there is a quote-unquote different price given for the return of dead bodies as opposed to live hostages. Hamas in turn has not given its answer yet. One of Hamas's spokespersons, Jihad Taha, was quoted in the Al Arabiya news network today as stating that the Israeli delegation is only trying to buy time in order to prolong the fighting in the Gaza Strip, adding that while negotiators are trying to bring the parties closer, Hamas's positions are not new and remain as they always were. He then cited that Hamas's position are, as they have been since negotiations in this round began, a complete ceasefire, restoring the internally displaced people, i.e. all complete freedom of movement of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, complete IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and the massive entrance of humanitarian aid. In Israel, contrary to the reports yesterday, today there was more pessimism that was reported around the return of the delegation, with people affiliated with the delegation stating that Hamas is likely encouraged by the international pressure that is mounting on Israel, including as a result of the attack that killed humanitarian aid workers yesterday. They also added that it is very likely that this is going to cause Hamas to toughen its positions in the hope that Israel is going to be compelled into a ceasefire regardless of a hostage deal. It was stated, however, that if things develop positively, the delegation already has permission from the War Cabinet to return to Cairo to continue negotiations. There have also been reports in the last several days that there may be another delegation that is going to go to Qatar to start up another channel of negotiations there. Remains to be seen. Right now, everyone is waiting for Hamas's answer. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there was one barrage of rockets fired from the Gaza Strip to the southern parts of Israel, targeting the areas of Kisufim today. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, and I will say that there were a lot fewer reports about the fighting in the Gaza Strip today, because most of the reports surrounded the humanitarian situation and the World Central Kitchen. However, what was reported in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, they reported the airstrikes that the IDF carried out in the areas of Zeitoun. 3 people were reported killed. This is very interesting because the IDF technically is not actually operating in Zeitoun anymore, although it does have forces surrounding the territory. So it is possible that this is in anticipation of the IDF again re-entering the areas of Zeitoun, or it could be that this was due to specific intelligence about something rather that the IDF wanted to strike in that area. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, airstrikes were reported against weapons warehouses, presumably in Deir el-Balah. However, again, it was not reported. There was also fighting that was reported in different parts of the central camps, likely in the areas of Nuseirat and al-Bureid refugee camps. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip and Han Yunis, there's continuous fighting going on in the al-Amal neighborhood. This is in the western parts of the city. Substantial gun battles were reported in different areas, and the IDF reported carrying out several different raids in different parts of the neighborhood. The IDF also published a lot of pictures of weaponry that was uncovered in al-Amal, including RPGs, explosive devices, guns, and ammunition. In addition to this, the IDF also reported arresting dozens of Hamas operatives in and around the Nasser hospital in Han Yunis, and that the IDF has completed its sweeps of both the Nasser hospital and al-Amal hospital to ensure that Hamas has not reestablished itself within those compounds. That is interesting to see how this develops. Al-Amal hospital has been completely evacuated. It is not functioning as a hospital anymore, so when the IDF says it carried out a sweep in Al-Amal hospital, that likely means soldiers just literally walked through the corridors. However, Nasser hospital has not been evacuated. There were no reports that came out regarding fighting that occurred in Nasser hospital, so it is unclear right now what the IDF means with regards to dozens of arrests that were occurred in and around Nasser hospital. Likely we'll find out more about this in the coming days, as the IDF either moves into a full operation in Nasser hospital, or if the IDF was just carrying out a local operation. In addition to this, in Rafah, bombings were reported in several different parts of the city. 6 people were killed in one of the airstrikes that occurred. It was not reported specifically where this airstrike occurred, nor did the IDF report what it was targeting. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. More information was published today about the initial meeting that occurred on Monday between the United States officials and Israeli officials with regards to a Rafah invasion. While after the initial meeting that occurred on Monday, there was a joint statement put out stating that Israel is going to take the U.S. concerns about a Rafah invasion into account, and that both sides said the meeting was productive and is going to continue. Today it was published that the U.S. side to the conversation raised very critical and harsh questions regarding Israel's evacuation plans and plans of invasion of Rafah, and expressed much more directly the United States' disapproval of the intended plans. Among others, for example, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is quoted as criticizing the IDF's plans to evacuate Palestinian civilians within 3 weeks, stating to the Israeli delegation, "Based on your current pace, it will take 4 months to evacuate Rafah, not 3 weeks." Blinken also reportedly stated that no matter what happens in Rafah, if Israel does not develop a real and realistic day-after plan, Hamas is not going to be dismantled. Even more harsh and direct was National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who, according to Israel's Channel 12, stated that the Israeli plan is not impressive, not applicable, and not something that the U.S. can be a partner of. So, right now, the talks are going to continue in the coming days. The Israeli delegation is actually due to travel to the United States in order to continue the negotiations. However, while in Israel, it is continuously, and today also being reported, that the talks were productive, what is being leaked at least is that the United States is expressing its absolute disapproval of the plans to invade Rafah. Remains to be seen how this develops. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This leaves the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on 256. 4 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This brings the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on to 1,553. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 71 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This brings the total number of Palestinians who have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 32,916. 75,494 Palestinians are reportedly injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and as I've stated in the past, there are still between 7,000 and 10,000 Palestinian bodies that are buried under the rubbles and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, there were a lot of reports that came in today regarding the IDF airstrike that was carried out yesterday that killed 7 employees of the World Central Kitchen. This is a humanitarian organization that is delivering a lot of food in the Gaza Strip. The attack reportedly occurred along the coastal road where the organization has a lot of activity due to incoming ships and the pier it has established around the areas of Deir el-Balah. According to what has been published, IDF drones targeted 3 World Central Kitchen vehicles with smaller missiles, and in addition to this, initial reports also stated that the attack did not stop even after the first vehicle was hit, and the people exited the vehicle in order to try to get medical attention. The IDF stated today that the attack is a result of misidentification and miscommunication with aid agencies, and there were many different statements that were made today, with the IDF assuring everyone that it did not carry out this attack intentionally, and this is all a tragic mistake. IDF spokesperson issued an official apology for the attack and spoke to the founder of the World Central Kitchen, and official apologies were also issued by Israel to the countries of which the workers are citizens. Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant also ordered today an immediate investigation, as well as the establishment of a joint war room between the IDF and different humanitarian organizations in order to increase coordination. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu also stated today, "This was a tragic and unintended strike of our forces against innocent people in the Gaza Strip," adding, This happens in war. We are investigating the matter and are in touch with the respective governments and will do everything to ensure that this does not happen again. Despite all these apologies and the taking of responsibility that both the IDF and Israel is trying to make very public, the response is likely to have severe consequences on the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. The World Central Kitchen CEO put out a statement saying, quote, "This was not just an attack on the organization, but on humanitarian organizations themselves who are working in the toughest conditions where food is being used as a weapon of war. It is unforgivable." The founder of the World Central Kitchen, Jose Anders, also stated, among others, that the Israeli government needs to stop its indiscriminate killing in the Gaza Strip. Political responses were also extremely critical. The EU demanded an investigation. The Polish foreign minister stated that the IDF has killed its own hostages as a result of not being careful enough. Also, the White House stated that the administration is furious about the situation, and President Biden himself stated in a conversation with the founder of the World Central Kitchen that he will make clear to Israel their commitment to protect humanitarian aid workers in Gaza. The end result, beyond all the condemnations and statements, are that the World Central Kitchen has officially suspended its activities in the Gaza Strip until further notice, including recalling the ships that were making their way from Cyprus to the Gaza Strip carrying 400 tons of food humanitarian aid. In addition to this, the World Central Kitchen partner organization, ANERA, also suspended its activities in the Gaza Strip. Collectively, both of these organizations have been supplying 2 million meals in the Gaza Strip each week. In addition, the United Arab Emirates also announced the suspension of their activities in the maritime corridor that is being developed between Cyprus and the Gaza Strip until receiving guarantees that workers' safety is absolutely assured and until the IDF investigation is completed. I will say that in the last month, the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip has been slightly improving after it got to very horrendous conditions several weeks ago. This has been as a result of the activity of the World Central Kitchen, more humanitarian aid coming in, facilitated and coordinated by the IDF, and the development of the maritime corridor. The fact that these organizations and the UAE are now suspending their activities is likely to have dire consequences on the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. We're going to learn more about that, I suspect, in the coming week. Other news related to the humanitarian situation: there were 8 paradropping missions that continued throughout the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Among others, planes that participated in humanitarian aid droppings today were Jordan, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, as well as the United States and several other countries. Other news related to the humanitarian situation and the fact that the humanitarian situation is likely to deteriorate in the foreseeable future. The Israeli War Cabinet has reportedly been discussing a list of demands that were given to Israel by the Biden administration in the last days, which include a substantial increase of humanitarian aid that will enter the Gaza Strip. According to the report, the demands include 3 things. The first is increasing the amount of aid trucks that enter the Gaza Strip per day to 500. The second is, quote-unquote, flooding the Strip with food. And the third is opening more land crossings between Israel and the Gaza Strip to facilitate the entrance of humanitarian aid, specifically in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Amidst these reports, a senior Israeli political official was quoted in several different news sites today, and I'll say that a senior Israeli political official is often code for the Israeli Prime Minister's office, stating that the pressure on Israel is going to increase following the World Central Kitchen incident, however adding, I quote, "Nothing will stop the destruction of Hamas, including in Rafah." The senior official was also quoted as saying that the Prime Minister is the one who decided to flood the Strip with food, and he informed the cabinet about this, i.e., rather than suggesting that this is a result of U.S. pressure, it is a result of the Prime Minister's decision, and stating, and I quote, "This helps us advance our aims in the war, including returning the hostages. Without fighting, the hostages will not return." On a separate topic related to the humanitarian situation, relating to the situation in Al-Shifa Hospital, where pictures of the devastation emerged yesterday after the IDF withdrew from the area, the World Health Organization stated today that the Al-Shifa Hospital can no longer function as a medical facility in any way. The spokesperson of the World Health Organization stated that the destruction of Al-Shifa is tantamount to ripping the heart out of the Gazan health system. I will say I showed some pictures of what emerged as a result of the IDF operation in Al-Shifa yesterday. It shows many buildings that are completely destroyed. It is very likely that Al-Shifa will only be able to return to be functioning as a hospital after there is some sort of ceasefire in the future, and it can rebuild. Moving on to the West Bank, there was a Palestinian attack that occurred near an IDF checkpoint around the areas of Kochav Yair. This is not an Israeli settlement, it is an area in Israel that is very adjacent to the West Bank. The attacker reportedly rammed his car into several police officers, injuring 4 of them, then drove to the checkpoint and exited the vehicle with a knife, trying to stab different security officers. Later reports stated that there were 2 attackers and that one of them was shot and killed and the other escaped. However, I will say this attack occurred roughly an hour before I recorded this, so there may be more information that will come out in the coming hours. In addition to this, in Nur Hasham's refugee camp in Tulkarem, there were reportedly gun battles and confrontations, this time between Palestinian factions and the security forces of the Palestinian Authority. According to reports, confrontations broke out after the death of Mu'tazim al-Araf. He's a Palestinian who was injured by the security forces of the Palestinian Authority as they tried to arrest him several days ago in the West Bank. There are no reports about any casualties or deaths that occurred as a result of these confrontations. However, it is another sign of increasing friction between different Palestinian factions in the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority. Regarding IDF activity, substantial IDF activity was reported in several different areas of the West Bank. These include in the areas of Kalandia, Nablus, Chiras Asala, as well as Jericho. The IDF reported arresting 22 Palestinians in these different operations. The Palestinian Prisoner Society, in turn, stated that 40 Palestinians were detained. The differences in numbers often relate to whether arrests occurred in East Jerusalem or not, as well as to different reporting or to differences between the concept of arresting and being detained. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel and to the Lebanese and Syrian fronts, there were substantial barrages of rockets and missiles that were fired from Syria, targeting the northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. Several barrages targeted both the Upper Galilee and Western Galilee. Among others, these targeted the areas of Nahariya, Sa'ar, Hanita. There were also barrages towards Shlomi, Ya'ara, Batzat, and Liman. Earlier barrages targeted the areas of Kibbutz Malachia, and other barrages targeted the areas of Ramot Naftali, Yiftach, and Mevot Hermon. Regarding IDF activity, IDF warplanes reportedly targeted a Hezbollah unit carrying out rocket fire in the areas of Anakora, as well as another unit in the areas of Wadi Hamul. In addition to this, Al-Miyadin reported IDF drone attack in the areas of Irvine, stating that one woman was injured in this attack, and Al-Akhbar reported artillery fire in the areas of Al-Khiyam. Hezbollah reported that another Hezbollah operative was killed in the war. Hezbollah states that the total number of operatives that have been killed since the war began is 266. However, the IDF states that that number is actually much higher. In Syria, there was an increase in the number of casualties that have been reported from yesterday's assassination of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards commander of all Syrian and Lebanese activity in the Iranian consulate. According to reports, there are now 13 casualties that have been reported, 7 of them Iranian and 6 Syrian citizens. Iran continues to issue threats of retaliation today, stating that it will make Israel regret its crimes. I will say that the assassination that occurred yesterday is a very high-profile assassination that is likely to have a lot of consequences for the Middle East. So if you missed that, check out my video from yesterday. It is quite an important event in the Israel-Hamas War. Moving on to some of the political and general trends for the last 24 hours. There's ongoing political unrest going on in Israel, which may end up precipitating more fractures in the political system, which then will shape the way the war is developed. Protesters today escalated their calls for new elections and a hostage deal. Among others, family members of hostages handcuffed themselves in a meeting of the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, saying that they are going to stay there until the hostages are released. Later in the night, there were further escalations after there was a protest that occurred several days ago with tens of thousands of people attending. Today, there was a protest again of several thousand people who then turned to march on the Prime Minister's residence in Jerusalem. Violent confrontations broke out as protesters tried to break through the perimeter fences. 5 protesters were arrested. There's been a lot of political upheaval as a result of this turn to violence. The protest movements are pledging to continue their protests until a hostage deal is achieved and until the government calls for new elections. Related to these protests in favor of a hostage deal, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's spokesperson stated in a conversation with the Friends of the Likud in the United States that these protests are not actually reflecting the majority of what the Israeli public thinks. Among others, the spokesperson stated that Israelis do not agree with the family members of hostages with regards to paying any price when it comes to a hostage deal, adding that while the media is portraying the popular support for this, the majority of people do not agree. He stated that the majority want to see the fighting continue, adding that the hostages are not a reason to lose the war to Hamas. And relating to public opinion polls and Netanyahu's popularity, which have been vastly decreasing since the war began, and the friction with the Biden administration, the spokesperson for the Prime Minister also stated in this meeting, "The Americans are wrong to think that because of the polls, Netanyahu's position does not represent Israel. He represents the majority opinion in Israel, including the center-left." The spokesperson also added that the vast majority of Israelis do not want elections and that there is wall-to-wall support for an invasion of Rafah. Other political news in the last 24 hours. A court case is being debated in Israel's High Court of Justice, where humanitarian organizations have appealed to the court to instruct the government to increase the amount of humanitarian aid that enters the Gaza Strip. Today, the state responded, asking the court to reject the appeal, stating that the state of Israel is living up to its obligation according to all laws of armed conflict, even more than is required. I will say in my own analysis that it is very unlikely that the court is going to intervene. The Israeli state submitted to the court detailed reports about how much it is doing to try to allow humanitarian aid in, and the court is likely to suggest that this is more of a political matter than something that is a judicial issue for the court. Remains to be seen in the coming days. The Israeli court has instructed the government to carry out different acts in the past. In this case, I estimate they likely will not. Other news, the UN Security Council announced today that it is going to convene a special session to discuss the attack that occurred in Syria yesterday. Russia initiated this session at Iran's request. Likely, any condemnation that will be a result of the session will be vetoed by the United States. Other political news, Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid is going to travel to the United States next week in order to meet with senior political officials to discuss various matters related to the war. These include the strategic relations between Israel and the United States and the hostage negotiations. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, stated today during his tour of the Middle East that Spain is going to recognize a Palestinian state between now and July. Speaking in Amman, Jordan, he stated that he believes that there is going to be a critical mass within the EU that is going to push other countries to do the same, adding that this was already discussed with leaders of Ireland, Malta, and Slovenia in their meeting back in the middle of March. Israel responded to this, stating that this is going to be a prize for terrorism and will decrease any chances of resolving the conflict in the Gaza Strip through negotiations. However, this may end up having some impact with regard to the future of the Gaza Strip and what is the official definition of Palestinian state, what does it have borders, how this will impact any Israeli activities in the Gaza Strip in the future. In addition to this, it was reported today that Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant refused a request of MK Yuli Edelstein of the Likud with regards to the Gaza Strip. Yuli Edelstein is not only the chair of the Committee on Security and Foreign Affairs in the Israeli Knesset, he also chairs the ad hoc committee that has called itself the Return to Full Israel Committee. This is a committee that brings together several different members of the Knesset who all want to see a return to what they call Greater Israel, i.e. re-establishing settlements both in the Gaza Strip as well as the settlement expansion in the West Bank. According to reports, Yuli Edelstein requested of Defense Minister Gallant to hold a meeting of the Intelligence Committee in the Gaza Strip. However, it was refused. Amidst this, it was reported today that in the Committee on Security and Foreign Affairs in the Knesset, Defense Minister Gallant also responded to calls by MK Tali Gottlieb, who stated that only Israeli control will teach the Gazans a lesson. He stated, and I quote, "Israeli control in the Gaza Strip is not possible for our security priorities. It is not right for the state of Israel, and I will not agree to it. The least bad alternative is a local leadership that will not be part of Hamas." With this, Gallant is referring again to his vision for the day-after plan, that is, grooming a local leadership that will not be affiliated with Hamas but will take some control and be recognized by the state of Israel to have some governing power in the Gaza Strip. Gallant's position has been publicly favored by the United States as what should be developed as a day-after plan in the Gaza Strip. However, it has not been adopted by Israel. Before I conclude, as I stated at the beginning, I'm reminding everyone that I'm going to be traveling for the next couple of days. I'll be back on Sunday. If there are any major developments, I'll put out a special video about that. In addition, if you enjoyed these videos, please do remember to give them a like, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.